June 6, 2023. It was supposed to be the day the bleeding stopped. You remember the image? PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan and PIF Governor Yasser Al-Rumayyan sitting side by side on CNBC announcing a framework agreement to unify the game of golf. The war was over. The lawsuits were dropped. The best players in the world were going to compete against each other again. It was the biggest lie in the history of modern sports. Here we are, 3 years later, and there is no merger. There is no unification. The game is more fractured, more diluted, and more confused than it was before that handshake took place. What was sold to us as a peace treaty was actually a 3-year stalling tactic that burned through billions of dollars and alienated the only people who actually matter, the fans. While we were waiting for a definitive agreement, the executives were playing a high-stakes game of chicken with the Department of Justice. American billionaires were buying pieces of the PGA Tour like it was a distressed asset. And the product on the TV screen got worse. We didn't just lose a merger, we wasted 3 prime years of golf history that we are never getting back. And when you look at who actually killed the deal, the fingerprints don't belong to who you think they do. To understand why the merger died, you have to understand why it was born in the first place. And it had nothing to do with growing the game. It was about a legal, terrified tactic known as discovery. In early 2023, the PGA Tour and LIV were locked in a brutal antitrust lawsuit. The PGA Tour was bleeding cash defending itself. Some reports say they were burning $50 million a year in legal fees alone. They were on the ropes. But they had one nuclear weapon. The U.S. court system ruled that the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, the PIF, had to hand over documents. This was a nightmare scenario for the PIF. We are talking about a sovereign wealth fund with $700 billion in assets. They operate in the shadows. The idea of handing over internal communications, financial records, and details on how the Saudi government directs its investments to a jagged U.S. judge was non-negotiable. So the PIF didn't come to the table because they wanted to be friends with Jay Monahan. They came to the table to kill the lawsuit and stop the discovery process. And it worked. The moment the framework agreement was announced, the lawsuits were dropped. The secrets remained safe. But here is where the story gets dark. Once the threat of the courtroom was gone, the urgency to actually close the deal evaporated. The Saudis got what they wanted, immunity. The PGA Tour got what they wanted, an end to the legal bills. The merger itself became a secondary problem that neither side really knew how to solve. The handshake wasn't a marriage proposal, it was a ceasefire to hide the bodies. For months after the announcement, the narrative was that the PGA Tour needed Saudi money to survive. The narrative was that the PIF was the only bank in town. But while the public was waiting for the final signatures, Jay Monahan was quietly taking meetings in New York and Boston that would blow the whole deal up. Enter the Strategic Sports Group, or SSG. This is the Avengers of American sports ownership. Fenway Sports Group, the owners of the New York Mets, the Atlanta Falcons, basically the heavy hitters of Western capitalism. In early 2024, they swooped in and dropped a $3 billion investment package onto the PGA Tour's desk. Suddenly, the tour didn't need the money anymore. They had American billions. This changed the leverage overnight. The PGA Tour went from begging for a lifeline to telling the Saudis, "We'll take your call if we have time." This was the moment the merger effectively died. The SSG deal created a new for-profit entity for the PGA Tour that was entirely American-controlled. It signaled to Yasser Al-Rumayyan that he wasn't going to be the savior of golf. At best, he would be a minority investor with no real power. The ego clash here cannot be overstated. You had the wealthiest fund in the Middle East being told they were no longer essential. The unification talks slowed to a crawl because the PGA Tour's new investors, the guys writing the checks, didn't trust the LIV product and didn't want to give up control. The cash that was supposed to save the merger ended up being the wall that separated the two sides permanently. While the billionaires were fighting over equity, the locker room was burning. Jay Monahan's survival as commissioner over the last 3 years is nothing short of a miracle, or perhaps a tragedy, depending on who you ask. Remember, for 2 years, Monahan told players like Rory, Scottie Scheffler, and Jordan Spieth that taking LIV money was a betrayal of the sport. He invoked 9/11. He talked about legacy. He convinced the game's biggest stars to turn down hundreds of millions of dollars to stay loyal to the Shield. Then, he went on television and shook hands with the enemy without telling a single one of them. The betrayal broke something fundamental in the sport's hierarchy. When the merger stalled, the players realized they had been played. Rory McIlroy resigned from the policy board, effectively washing his hands of the politics. The rank-and-file players demanded payouts to make up for the LIV offers they turned down. Instead of focusing on how to integrate LIV and PGA players, the tour spent the last 3 years trying to buy back the loyalty of its own roster. They had to create equity grants and massive bonus pools just to keep guys from walking out the door. Management wasn't negotiating a merger, they were fighting a mutiny. And you can't build a new global future when your own house is on fire. This internal chaos meant that every time a proposal for the merger came up, the player directors, who were now furious and skeptical, scrutinized it to death. The trust was gone, and without trust, you don't get a deal. But if there was one moment that proved the merger was a zombie, it was the defection of Jon Rahm. Think about the timeline. The framework agreement happened in June 2023. The war was supposed to be over. Poaching was supposed to stop. And then, in December 2023, the reigning Masters champion, the face of the PGA Tour's future, signed a deal with LIV Golf worth a reported $500 million. This was the PIF sending a message: we are not done. Rahm's move destroyed the idea of a ceasefire. It proved that until a definitive agreement was signed, the Saudis would keep buying the tour's best assets. But it also trapped Rahm in a gilded cage. Over the last 2 years, we've seen the rumors, the reports of buyer's remorse, the frustration with the 54-hole shotgun starts. Rahm is a competitor who cares about history, and he found himself playing exhibition golf while the PGA Tour marched on without him. Even though he publicly denies it, the cracks have shown. But his departure did something else. It diluted the product to a breaking point. With Rahm, Bryson, and Cam Smith on one side, and Scotty, Rory, and Xander on the other, neither tour feels like Major League Golf anymore. We have 2 AAA leagues pretending to be the big show. Rahm's move didn't force a merger, it just entrenched the stalemate. It made the PGA Tour angry, and LIV Golf arrogant, widening the gap exactly when they were supposed to be building a bridge. Even if Monahan and Al Rumayyan had fallen in love and the players had all held hands, there was one force that was never going to let this merger happen: the United States government. We often overlook this, but the Department of Justice has been circling professional golf like a shark. The moment the framework agreement was announced, the DOJ Antitrust Division opened an investigation. Senators like Richard Blumenthal hauled the executives into hearings that were humiliating for everyone involved. The reality of the last 3 years is that a full merger, where the PGA Tour and PIF combine into one monopoly, was likely illegal under U.S. antitrust law. The government viewed it as a foreign entity buying control of an American institution to sanitize its reputation, while simultaneously reducing competition in the labor market for golfers. Every time the two sides got close to a deal, the legal advisors would step in and say, "The DOJ will sue to block this." So they froze. They spent 3 years trying to find a loophole that didn't exist. The death of the merger wasn't just about money or ego, it was about the law. They promised a unification they couldn't legally deliver. So instead of admitting that, they just kept extending the deadline, hoping the political winds would change. They didn't. So what are we left with in 2026? Look at LIV Golf today. They aren't acting like a league that's about to be absorbed. They are digging trenches. They've moved to 72 holes. They are fighting harder for world ranking points. They are locking players into multi-year contracts that extend well past any potential merger date. This is not the behavior of a company looking for an exit strategy. This is the behavior of a company preparing for a permanent Cold War. The merger is dead because both sides have realized they can survive apart. The PGA Tour has the SSG money and the legacy. LIV has the oil money and the disruptor energy. The dream of a world tour where everyone plays together 15 times a year is gone. What we have now is a broken ecosystem. We have the majors season, 4 weeks a year where golf feels real, and then 48 weeks of noise. We have meaningless YouTube debates about TV ratings and revenue splits while the casual sports fan has tuned out and switched to the NFL or F1. The tragedy of the last 3 years isn't that the billionaires lost money, they'll be fine. The tragedy is that we watch the prime years of the most talented generation of golfers in history get wasted on Zoom calls and courtroom filings. We should have been watching Rory battles Rahm on Sunday afternoons at the Memorial. We should have seen Bryson DeChambeau and Scotty Scheffler trading blows at Bay Hill. Instead, we got press releases about frameworks and strategic alliances. They told us they were growing the game. In reality, they shrank it. They took a niche sport, sliced it in half, and asked us to pay double for the privilege of watching it die. The merger is dead. And looking back at the wreckage of the last 3 years, you have to wonder if the sport of golf will ever truly recover from the attempt. But I want to know what you think. Is golf better off with 2 separate tours? Or did the suits ruin the game for good? Pick a side in the comments because the debate is the only thing we have left. Thanks for watching.